Hey guys, in this video I'm going to be showing you some techniques to paint some sickly nurgle flesh that you can use for any nurgle models, but we're going to be painting a beast of nurgle, so let's get into it. We're going to start out with 2 thin coats of some flayed one flesh mixed with a little bit of dungeon stone gray. I'm going to take some watered down flayed one flesh and we're going to do an overbrush. So sort of like a dry brush, but the paint is a little bit more wet, but just trying to hit the higher details. We're going to do a shade of Carroburg Crimson, and I'm just watering that down a little bit. Since it's a lighter color, we don't need quite as dark of a pigment. So just watering it down so it's a bit thinner, and just painting that all over the flesh. Now while that's a little bit wet still, we're going to take some non-watered down Carroburg Crimson and paint that into the deeper recesses, like kind of between the folds, and just make it a little bit darker in certain areas. I'm going to take some Slanesh Gray that's watered down a little bit, so the opacity is not going to be 100%, and it's going to show that color beneath it through a little bit so that it blends with the rest of the model, but I'm just going to paint that over all the tentacles. I'm going to use some Carroburg Crimson and some Druchii Violet to shade these tentacles, just using the 2 different colors so that we have a bit of variation there and make it more interesting. I'm going to take some Carroburg Crimson and Druchii Violet now and water it down a little bit, and I'm going to start painting it on where the tentacle connects to the rest of the body, and just painting it in brush strokes towards the tentacles to blend in that color and transition the 2 pieces. I'm going to take some Calgar Blue and some Slanesh Gray, and I'm going to water that down quite a bit and kind of just stipple that onto the tentacles to get a bit of texture. I'm going to highlight the skin one more time with some flayed one flesh, focusing on the raised areas, watering down that paint and just blending it a little bit towards the highest points. I'm going to take some Mephiston Red and paint it into all of the open wounds. I'm also going to paint some into the boils, and I'm going to water it down to cover the highest part of the boil and just dab off some of the excess there. I'm going to take some Carroburg Crimson and paint it into all of the open wounds, and I'm going to water it down and blend it into the open wounds, create a transition from the skin color into the wound. I'm going to take some Gryph-hound Orange mixed with some Averland Sunset, and I'm going to water that down and paint it into certain details just to create some variation in the color of the skin. I also paint some onto the tip of the tail, blending it towards the end, create a transition to an orangish color towards the end of the tail. I paint some Screaming Skull onto all the horns and teeth. And then I just hit those with some Agrax Earthshade. I painted some Averland Sunset onto the webbed fingers, and I shaded those with some Carroburg Crimson. I paint a little bit more Agrax Earthshade onto the tips of the horn to transition it to a brown. I'm going to use some Gryph-hound Orange mixed with some Averland Sunset over those boils, watered down, and then I'm going to use a bit more Averland Sunset for a second layer on there to brighten them up towards the higher points. I'm going to take some Mephiston Red mixed with a little bit of Screaming Skull to highlight the wounds. I'm going to mix in some Corax White with the Mephiston Red to edge highlight the wounds and then blend that in around them a little bit as well. I'm doing a final highlight to the skin with some Screaming Skull, painting a little dot of that pretty much to the highest parts of the flesh of the model. I'm painting on some Brass Scorpion to this little bell here. I'm going to shade it with some Agrax Earthshade. Using some Corax White on the eyeball. Then I'm going to carefully paint on the iris with some Mephiston Red. And I'm going to shade it with some Carroburg Crimson, and I'm going to paint on the pupil with a little bit of Abaddon Black. I'm going to paint on a little bit of Sabarite Green, watered down, just painting that into the crevices of the bronze. And then we're going to paint some Vallejo Satin Varnish over all the flesh. And I'm going to use some Ardcoat Gloss Varnish, just thickly applying that to all the tentacles, the open wounds. And I'm going to stipple on a little bit towards the crevices, like between the fat folds and under the tail. I'm going to use some Blood for the Blood God mixed with a little bit of Abaddon Black, and I'm going to paint that into the wounds, mostly focusing on towards the bottom. And I'm going to also make some streaks of blood running down from the wounds. I'm going to use some hot glue to glue on some skulls to the base. And I'm going to slap on some homemade texture paint that I've made with some sand, some Elmer's glue, spackle, and paint. I'm painting up the skulls with some black-brown Monument Hobbies primer. And I'm going to dry brush it with some Vallejo orange-brown and red leather. And then a little bit of Screaming Skull. I'm painting all the skulls with some Screaming Skull. Shading those with some Agrax Earthshade, and then I'm going to take a t-shirt and dab off some of the excess paint. I'm taking some Yoo-Hoo glue and I'm going to glob that on to create some puddles of goo texture on the base. And then I'm going to take some Nurgle's Rot mixed with a little bit of Vallejo water texture and paint that on over the Yoo-Hoo glue. I'm going to take some hot glue and just apply it straight onto the model, and with this toothpick-like tool here, I'm going to stretch that between the tentacles and certain areas that I want to make some slime stretched between, such as the tentacles on the head here. And some stretching up from the base onto the bottom of the model. And I'm going to paint some Nurgle's Rot, just globbing that on directly onto these. So with that finished, that's pretty much it. Thanks for checking out the video, and here's the reveal.